Human myths that terrify aliens. Witnessed by survivors, Hook the Vareki diplomat Lirzal trembled as he recounted the tale, his 3 upper appendages quivering uncontrollably, while the lower pair clutched desperately at his ceremonial robe. The recording devices of 17 different species captured his testimony, an unprecedented gathering of the Galactic Council's most senior representatives. They smiled at death, he whispered, voice modulator crackling with distortion from his uneven breathing. The humans stood before the Drekmar horde, outnumbered 30-1, and they smiled. The chamber fell silent. Even the normally stoic Julari delegates exchanged alarmed glances. What happened next? Prompted Elder Untak of the Melosian hegemony. Lirzal's compound eyes darkened with memory. The humans told their warriors a story before the battle. An ancient human myth about 300 warriors who once faced 1,000,000. They called Thermopylae. The translation system stuttered over the unfamiliar phonetics, and then asked Ambassador Vitrin from the Cephian Commonwealth. Lirzal's voice stabilized but grew darker. Then they showed us why human myths terrify the stars. Captain Vria Nalakesh of the Earth Expeditionary Forces stared out over the barren plains of Drekmar Prime, her enhanced optical implants calculating distances, angles, and probabilities. Behind her, the remnants of the human rescue expedition, 42 soldiers from 6 different Earth nations, checked their weapons and armor for the 10th time. So we're really doing this, Lieutenant Casimir Novak muttered, sliding a fresh energy cell into his plasma rifle. 42 of us against, what's the latest count, Captain? 1,216, Vria replied without turning. Plus whatever reinforcements they might have called in since our last scan. Sergeant Paz Mindaro let out a low whistle. Reminds me of that old story my grandfather used to tell, the Battle of Thermopylae. The 300 Spartans nodded. Specialist Elia Kuri, her fingers dancing over the control panel of her exoframe, holding off the Persian army. Major Ryunosuke Hidaka, second in command, approached Vria. Unlike the others in their powered combat suits, the Major wore only the standard-issue lightweight tactical armor, his sole concession to augmentation being the neural interface implanted at the base of his skull. The Vareki ambassador's shuttle is safely away, Captain, he reported. Though I must register my formal protest at this course of action. We could still attempt to reach the extraction point at the southern ridge. Vria finally turned from her contemplation of the battlefield. The Drekmar forces have cut off all escape routes, Major. This valley is the only place we can make a stand that doesn't put the refugee column at risk. 3 days earlier, their mission had been simple. Extract Ambassador Lirzal and his diplomatic entourage from Drekmar Prime before the planetary civil war engulfed the capital. What they hadn't counted on was the ambassador insisting they also evacuate 300 Vareki civilians, scholars, artists, and their families, who had been trapped when the fighting escalated. The refugees were now making their slow way through the mountain passes to the emergency extraction point where an Allied cruiser waited. But they needed time that could only be bought with blood. We're not Spartans, Hidaka said quietly. No, Vria agreed, her dark eyes reflecting. The twin sons of the Drekmar system. We're humans, and that's always been enough. She activated her tactical display, projecting a holographic map of the valley floor. The Drekmar will approach from the north. Their battle doctrine favors overwhelming force in direct frontal assault. They believe their superior numbers guarantee victory. They're not wrong, Lieutenant Amara Okafor pointed out, checking the power levels on her rail sniper. Perhaps not, Vria conceded. But they've never fought humans before. The distant rumble of Drekmar war machines grew louder, and dust clouds rose on the horizon. Sergeant Mindaro strode to the front of their small line, her heavy assault exoframe whirring with each movement. Permission to address the troops, Captain? She requested. Vria nodded, and Mindaro turned to face her comrades. I'm not much for speeches, the sergeant began, her voice carrying across their position. But I want all of you to remember something. Every minute we hold this line is another minute those civilians get closer to safety. And when they tell this story, and they will tell this story, I want them to remember us the way we remember the 300. A grim smile spread across faces both young and old. From hardened veterans to fresh recruits, they were Earth's warriors, descendants of countless generations who had faced impossible odds and somehow survived. The first wave of Drekmar soldiers appeared at the crest of the hill, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Captain, Nalakesh drew her plasma blade, the edge humming with barely contained energy. For Earth, she said quietly, for humanity. And then, as one, they smiled at death. Part 2. The Drekmar commander Grikthar clicked his mandibles in confusion as he observed the tiny human formation through his magnifying optics. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Vresh, shifted nervously. Beside him, "They are not retreating," Vresh noted, antennae twitching with agitation. "Have they not seen our numbers?" "They have seen," Grikthar replied. "They simply do not care." He had studied the battle recordings from other encounters with humans throughout the sector. These creatures were unpredictable, innovative, and disturbingly resilient. "Perhaps they have reinforcements approaching?" Vresh suggested hopefully. The alternative, that these few humans intended to stand against the might of a Drekmar battle legion, was too absurd to contemplate. "No," Grikthar said. "Our sensors would have detected incoming ships. They stand alone." The commander raised his battle staff, signaling the forward cohorts to advance. 600 Drekmar warriors surged forward, their chittering war cries echoing across the valley. From the human line came no answering shouts, no displays of bravado. Just terrible, focused silence. When the first wave of Drekmar crossed the invisible boundary the humans had calculated, the valley erupted. Precisely. Placed micromines detonated in sequence, shredding the front ranks of the Drekmar force. Railguns opened fire from concealed positions, their hypersonic projectiles punching through the naturally armored bodies of the insectoid warriors. "Impossible," Vresh hissed. "How did they deploy such defenses in so little time?" Grikthar didn't answer. He was watching the human captain, a female he believed, though with mammals it was sometimes difficult to tell. She stood exposed on a small rise, seemingly unconcerned by the chaos erupting around her as she directed her forces with calm precision. The Drekmar's initial charge faltered, then reformed. 300 warriors had fallen in the first minute, but hundreds more pressed forward, scrambling over the bodies of their fallen comrades. When they reached the human defensive line, the real horror began. The humans in their powered armor moved with devastating efficiency. A large one, Grikthar's intelligence briefing had identified this type as a heavy assault specialist, waded directly into the Drekmar formation, mechanical limbs crushing exoskeletons and tearing off mandibles with horrifying ease. "Send in the second wave," Grikthar ordered, his voice steady despite the unease building in his thorax. "Full deployment of anti-armor weaponry." As the second wave of Drekmar warriors joined the fray, Grikthar noticed something disturbing. The humans were talking. In the midst of brutal combat, they communicated not with urgent shouts or desperate pleas, but with calm, almost conversational tones. Occasionally, one would even emit the strange facial contortion his briefing had identified as a smile. They are enjoying this, he realized with dawning horror. The human sniper had found an elevated position and was methodically eliminating Drekmar officers, her weapon's distinctive crack punctuating the battlefield cacophony at precise 5-second intervals. Each shot, one dead commander. "Target the sniper." Vresh clicked urgently. "She'll relocate before our weapons can lock on," Grikthar replied. "They always do." At the center of the human line, their captain had finally engaged directly. Her plasma blade carved through the Drekmar ranks with terrifying grace, the weapon's edge hot enough to cauterize the wounds it inflicted, preventing the natural coagulants in Drekmar blood from activating. "Send in the Ravagers," Grikthar ordered, referring to the gene-modified berserker troops held in reserve for desperate situations. "But Commander," Vresh protested, "the Ravagers cannot distinguish between—" "Send them," Grikthar insisted, "or we lose this valley." As the massive containment pods were brought forward, Grikthar watched the human captain. She had paused in her deadly work, head tilted slightly as if listening to something. Then, to his astonishment, She looked directly toward his command position, impossible at this distance without advanced optics, and made the human facial expression his intelligence briefing had specifically warned about. She smiled. 7 hours into the battle, the valley floor had become a graveyard of Drekmar, bodies and broken war machines. The human line had been pushed back 3 times, only to reform in new defensive positions, each more cunningly prepared than the last. Ambassador Lirzal huddled in the relative safety of a rocky overhang 2 kilometers away, watching through his distance viewer. Against his fervent protests, Captain Nalakesh had assigned a single human soldier to escort him to safety, a young woman named Daphne Iqbal, who carried a compact medic kit and a surprisingly heavy sidearm. "Shouldn't we keep moving toward the extraction point?" Lirzal asked nervously, his translator implant converting his clicks and whistles into the human language. Specialist Iqbal shook her head, never taking her eyes off the battlefield below. "Captain's orders are to wait here until the main Drekmar force is fully committed. Their scouts are still patrolling the mountain passes." "But your comrades, they cannot possibly survive," Lirzal said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper as he witnessed a Drekmar ravager, a grotesque, gene-modified monster nearly 3 meters tall, lift a human soldier in its claws and tear the armor open like a food container. "You'd be surprised what humans can survive," Iqbal replied, her tone unnervingly calm. As if to punctuate her statement, the seemingly doomed human soldier detonated something in his hand. The explosion took the ravager's head clean off, along with the soldier's arm. But to Lirzal's astonishment, the human struggled back to his feet, cauterized the stump with his own plasma sidearm, and rejoined the fight. "That's Specialist Kuri," Iqbal noted with what sounded like admiration. "She's always been resourceful." Lirzal's compound eyes widened. "That was a female of your species? I thought females were your nurturers." Iqbal finally turned to look at him, her expression unreadable to his alien perceptions. "Ambassador, in human history, some of our fiercest warriors have been mothers protecting their young, or anyone they consider under their protection." She gestured toward the refugee column, now tiny dots in the distance making their way along the mountain path. "Right now, your people are under our protection." A sudden explosion rocked the battlefield as 3 Drekmar heavy assault vehicles simultaneously detonated. Lirzal's visual receptors automatically dimmed to protect from the glare. "How did they?" he began. "Major Hidaka," Iqbal explained. "He specializes in reprogramming enemy systems. Those tanks are now creating a wall of burning wreckage that the Drekmar ground forces will have to navigate around." Indeed, the Drekmar advance had momentarily halted, their formations thrown into disarray by the unexpected destruction of their armored support. In the lull, Lirzal noticed Captain Nalakesh and her remaining officers huddled in a tight circle. Even at this distance, there was something in their posture that disturbed him. Not the resignation he would expect from warriors facing certain death, but something almost predatory. "What are they planning now?" he asked. Iqbal checked her tactical display. "Something that will give your people a few more hours." She stood abruptly. "We need to move now." "What?" "But you said—" "Change of plans," Iqbal interrupted, already gathering her equipment. "The captain is initiating Protocol Lazarus." "What is Protocol Lazarus?" Lirzal asked, scrambling to his feet. Iqbal's expression darkened. "It's named after an old human myth. About someone who returned from death." She paused, then added more softly, "It's a last resort." As they began their ascent up the rocky path, Lirzal risked one final glance back at the battlefield. The human line was changing. Formation again, but this time they were not retreating. They were advancing. "They're attacking?" he asked incredulously. "But there are still hundreds of Drekmar warriors." "Yes," Iqbal confirmed, her voice tight. "That's Protocol Lazarus. When you have nothing left to lose, you take the fight to the enemy." "But that's suicide." "Maybe," she conceded, "but it's also very, very human." As they climbed higher into the mountains, The sounds of renewed battle echoed behind them. Lear Zal would later swear to the Galactic Council that what he heard wasn't the desperate last stand of doomed warriors, but the methodical, terrifying advance of predators who had decided that if they were to die, they would do so on their own terms, and they would not go alone. Grikthar had never retreated from battle in his 37 cycles of military service. The concept was anathema to Drekmar martial philosophy. One advanced or one died in place. Yet, as he watched the human counteroffensive tear through his forward command post, the commander found himself seriously contemplating the unthinkable. "We've lost contact with battalions 3 through 7, Vresh reported, his exoskeleton visibly cracked from a near miss by human artillery. "The remaining Ravagers have gone berserk and are attacking our own forces and—" He hesitated. "Speak," Grikthar ordered. The human leader sent a direct communication. "For you specifically." Grikthar's antennae stiffened in surprise. "Display it." The holographic projector sputtered to life, showing the face of the human captain. Blood, the unsettling red fluid that humans circulated instead of proper hemolymph, streaked one side of her face, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Commander Grikthar," she said, her words translated into Drekmar clicking by the system. "I am Captain Vria Nalakesh of Earth. By now you've realized this isn't a standard defensive action. My forces are implementing what we call a berserker protocol. We've injected combat stimulants that will keep us fighting long past the point where our bodies should have failed." She leaned closer to the recording device and Grikthar instinctively stepped back from her image. "Here's what you need to know. In approximately 20 minutes, the neural inhibitors will completely dissolve. When that happens, my soldiers will no longer recognize friend from foe. We will attack anything that moves until our hearts stop beating, and we've rigged our power armor to detonate upon catastrophic biometric failure." She smiled then, an expression that Grikthar now recognized as a threat display. "You have 19 minutes to remove your forces from this valley, Commander. After that, I cannot guarantee the survival of anyone, including myself." The transmission ended. "She's bluffing," Vresh insisted, though his mandibles clicked nervously. "Humans cannot override their survival instincts so completely. Can't they?" Grikthar mused. The battle reports he'd studied from other encounters with humans suggested otherwise. There were documented cases of lone human soldiers continuing to fight despite injuries that would have immediately incapacitated any Drekmar warrior. A deafening explosion interrupted his thoughts as another command vehicle erupted in flames. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of human soldiers moving with unnatural speed and coordination, ignoring wounds that should have been debilitating. "How many warriors have we lost?" Grikthar asked. Vresh consulted his tactical display. 837 confirmed casualties, nearly 200 unaccounted for, over 80% of his force, devastated by fewer than 50 humans. And the humans? Difficult to determine. Their life signs are erratic, but we've confirmed at least 12 dead. Grikthar calculated quickly. At this rate of attrition, he might eventually prevail. But at what cost? His entire legion would be destroyed, and for what? A minor tactical victory on a planet already torn apart by civil war. "Signal the retreat," he decided. "Commander," Vresh protested. "The High Nest will have your carapace for this." "Better my carapace than the complete destruction of the 47th Legion," Grikthar replied. "Order all forces to disengage immediately and withdraw to the secondary staging area." As the retreat signals echoed across the battlefield, Grikthar watched the human captain through his optical enhancers. She stood amid the carnage, her armor dented and scorched, observing the Drekmar withdrawal with an expression he couldn't interpret. Was it triumph, relief, or something else entirely? Whatever it was, Grikthar made a mental note to include a specific warning in his after-action report. Humans did not fight like any other species in the galaxy. They did not primarily fight for territory, or resources, or even glory. They fought for each other, and that made them more dangerous than any Ravager the Drekmar had ever engineered. As his personal transport lifted off, Grikthar caught one final glimpse of Captain Nalakesh. She raised her hand in what his cultural database identified as a formal salute, a gesture of respect between warriors. Despite himself, Grikthar returned the gesture, clicking his mandibles in the Drekmar equivalent. Some enemies, he reflected, deserved acknowledgement. The extraction ship Aurora Ascendant hovered at the edge of the Drekmar system, its stealth systems engaged as it awaited the refugee transport. On the bridge, Fleet Admiral Ozaro Kincaid listened impassively as communications. Officer Eun-ji Kyung delivered the latest report. The refugee shuttle has cleared the atmosphere, Admiral. All 300 Vareki civilians accounted for, plus Ambassador Lirzal and Specialist Iqbal. And the rest of the ground team? Kincaid asked, though the tightness around his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Kyung's voice faltered, slightly. No additional human life signs detected, sir. Captain Nalakesh activated the emergency beacon 18 minutes ago, but it went silent shortly thereafter. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. The senior officers, many of whom had served with Captain Nalakesh on previous missions, maintained their professional composure, but the strain showed in subtle ways. A jaw clenched too tightly, fingers gripping console edges with unnecessary force. The Drekmar forces have withdrawn from the valley. Tactical Officer Rayanch Mehta reported, his voice carefully neutral. Satellite imagery shows significant casualties on both sides. Admiral Kincaid nodded once, his silver-streaked hair catching the blue light from the holographic displays. Prepare to receive the refugee shuttle and initiate Protocol Memento. The C. Bridge crew straightened reflexively. Protocol Memento was rarely invoked, a formal recognition that those lost had died in service of something greater than themselves. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Alejandra Cortez spoke up from her station at Tio Navigation. Permission to lead a recovery team once the Drekmar forces have fully withdrawn. Denied, Commander, Kincaid replied, his tone softening slightly. Captain Nalakesh was explicit in her final transmission. No recovery attempt is to be made. In the medical bay, Ambassador Lirzal sat motionless as a human doctor treated his minor injuries. The Vareki diplomat seemed oblivious to the physical discomfort, his compound eyes fixed on the viewing screen that showed the approaching planet. They knew, didn't they? He asked suddenly. From the beginning. They knew they wouldn't survive. Doctor, Mira Patel finished applying a regenerative patch to his injured limb before responding. Captain Nalakesh understood the tactical situation, yes. Then why? Lirzal's translator struggled to convey the complex harmonics of his distress. Why would they sacrifice themselves for non-humans? We are not even part of your alliance. Dr. Patel's hands stilled momentarily. There's an old human story, she said quietly, about a good Samaritan who helped a stranger from a different tribe, a different people. It's part of who we are. But 41 lives for 300. Lirzal's voice trailed off. The math is irrelevant, Dr. Patel replied. Captain Nalakesh wouldn't have calculated it that way. For her, for any of them, it would have been simple. People needed help, and they could provide it. In the ship's main hold, the rescued Vareki huddled in groups, their chittering communications subdued as they processed their narrow escape. Among them moved Specialist Daphne Iqbal, the sole survivor of the Earth expedition, distributing emergency rations and medical supplies. A young Vareki approached her hesitantly, its translator device emitting slightly stilted human language. Your companions. They stayed behind for us. Iqbal paused in her work, something complicated passing across her features. Yes. But you did not know us. We were strangers to you. That doesn't matter to humans, Iqbal explained gently. Not when it counts. The young Vareki's appendages moved in a gesture of profound confusion. My parent clutch says that in our historic texts, humans are described as dangerous predators, that your species once hunted across vast territories, pursuing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Iqbal's lips curved into a sad smile. That part of our history is true. We evolved as persistence hunters. When we decide something matters, we don't give up easily. Is that why your warriors told the story of Thermopylae before the battle? As a reminder not to surrender, Iqbal looked surprised. You heard about that? Ambassador Lirzal told us. He said they invoked ancient human myths before facing the Drekmar horde. Iqbal was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Humans have always used stories to make sense of difficult choices. The tale of Thermopylae is about sacrifice, yes, but it's also about what makes sacrifice meaningful. In the command center, Admiral Kincaid watched the long-range scanners which showed multiple Drekmar vessels breaking orbit. They were retreating not just from the battlefield, but from the entire sector. Sir, Communications Officer Kyung called. Out. We're receiving a transmission from the Drekmar flagship. Kincaid raised an eyebrow. Put it through. The holographic display flickered, then resolved into the image of a battle-scarred Drekmar commander. I am Grikthar of the Drekmar 47th Legion, the translator intoned. I wish to convey formal acknowledgement of the warrior honor displayed by Captain Vria Nalakesh and her soldiers. Admiral Kincaid's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried the weight of controlled emotion. Your acknowledgement is noted, Commander Grikthar. The Drekmar commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, a gesture the translation system identified as equivalent to a solemn nod. The bodies of your warriors remain undisturbed on the battlefield. We did not claim trophies, as is our custom with worthy opponents. Instead, we have marked the valley as hallowed ground. With that, the transmission ended. Admiral Kincaid stood, silent for a long moment before turning to his executive officer. Adjust our departure vector. Before we leave this system, we will perform a traditional spacer's salute over the valley. Aye, sir, the officer replied. As the Aurora Ascendant changed course, Ambassador Lirzal made his way to the observation deck, where he found Specialist Iqbal gazing out at the stars. I have been appointed to represent my people at the Galactic Council, he told her. I will tell them what I witnessed here, what humans are truly capable of. Iqbal didn't look away from the viewport. What will you tell them? That the most terrifying thing about humans is not your capacity for violence, Lirzal said softly. It is your capacity for sacrifice. 5 standard galactic cycles had passed since the Battle of Drekmar Valley, as it had come to be known throughout the 17 major spacefaring civilizations. What had begun as a desperate last stand by a handful of human soldiers had evolved into something far more powerful. A story. In the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Lirzal stood at the central podium, his ceremonial robes shimmering under the light of 1,000 stars projected onto the domed ceiling. Before him sat representatives from over 200 worlds, including, for the first time, a delegation from Earth. Esteemed colleagues, Lirzal began, his translator now calibrated to convey the subtle harmonics of his native speech pattern. Today we vote on the admission of humanity to full council membership. As the primary sponsor of their application, I wish to address the concerns raised by the Jovian Consortium regarding humanity's unpredictable and potentially destabilizing influence. The Jovian representative, a gelatinous entity contained within an environmental suit, pulsed with faint bioluminescence, a sign of agitation. The concerns stand, Ambassador. Humans are an evolutionary anomaly, a prey species with predator instincts. Their behavior cannot be reliably modeled. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as various delegates clicked, whistled, or emitted pheromones signaling agreement or disagreement. It is true that humans do not fit neatly into our established taxonomies, Lirzal acknowledged. But I submit that this is precisely why their perspective would benefit our council. He gestured toward a crystalline display that materialized in the center of the chamber. 5 cycles ago, 42 human soldiers sacrificed themselves to save 300 Vareki civilians, beings they had never met, from a civilization that had no formal ties to Earth. The display showed footage from the battle, captured by Lirzal's own recording device during his escape. The images were both horrifying and awe-inspiring, human soldiers fighting with impossible determination against overwhelming odds. What you are witnessing is not recklessness or bloodlust, Lirzal continued. It is something our xenopsychologists still struggle to classify. The closest approximation in the unified language would be selfless dedication to principle. The Malosian elder Untak raised an appendage requesting recognition. Ambassador, while the courage displayed is undeniable, one could argue this was simply an evolutionary response. Humans evolved as pack hunters who protected their social group. Valid observation, Elder, Lirzal conceded, except for one crucial fact. Those Vareki civilians were not part of humanity's pack. By every evolutionary model we possess, there was no logical reason for those soldiers to sacrifice themselves. He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the chamber. In the 5 cycles since that day, something remarkable has happened. The story of Drekmar Valley has spread throughout the galaxy. It is told in the crystal caves of Jular, in the floating cities of Aquaria Prime, and even, I'm told, in the warrior creches of Drekmar itself. The display shifted to show footage from across the galaxy, different species recounting the tale, in their own ways with their own cultural interpretations. The humans have a saying, myths are not lies but truths told through story. What happened at Drekmar Valley has become more than historical fact. It has become myth. And myths, colleagues, have power. Lirzal turned to face the human delegation, led by Admiral Kincaid and Specialist Iqbal, now promoted to captain. Before the battle, Captain Nalakesh told her soldiers the ancient human myth of Thermopylae. 300 warriors standing against 1,000,000. It gave them courage, context, meaning. That is the true power of humanity. Not their weapons, or their technology, but their stories. The narratives they create that inspire them to transcend their biological limitations. The Jovian representative pulsed rapidly. This is precisely our concern, Ambassador. A species motivated by mythological thinking rather than rational self-interest is inherently unpredictable. Perhaps, Lirzal acknowledged. But consider this. In the 5 cycles since Drekmar Valley, piracy in the outer territories has decreased by 68%. Slave trading in the Cephian expanse has all but disappeared. The Drekmar civil war ended with a peace treaty rather than genocide. He gestured to a series of statistical projections, all because word spread that humans, with their irrational dedication to their principles, were patrolling those sectors. The mere myth of human intervention has proven more effective than 1,000 enforcement drones. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this information. We have always valued stability in this council, Lirzal continued. But stability without moral foundation is merely stagnation. Humanity offers us something we have long forgotten, the courage to stand for principle even at great personal cost. He lowered his voice, forcing the delegates to lean forward to hear him. The greatest myth about humans is not their ferocity in battle or their technological ingenuity. It is the myth that they will always defend the defenseless, always stand against tyranny, always choose the difficult right over the expedient wrong. And here is the terrifying truth, esteemed colleagues. Lirzal's compound eyes swept across the assembly. It is not a myth at all. It is who they are. In the gallery, above the chamber floor, a young Vareki named Tirlan watched with wide eyes. He had been just a child during the evacuation from Drekmar Prime, carried in his parents' arms as they fled through the mountain passes. Now he wore the insignia of the newly formed Interspecies Diplomatic Corps, a joint initiative between Earth and Varek. Beside him stood his mentor, Captain Daphne Iqbal, her uniform bearing the small gold star that designated survivors of Drekmar Valley. Do you think they'll vote for admission? Tirlan asked quietly. Iqbal's gaze remained fixed on Ambassador Lirzal. I don't know. Fear is a powerful motivator, and humans scare a lot of species. Because of how we fought at Drekmar? No, Iqbal replied. Because of why we fought. Below, the voting commenced, representatives from each world registering their decision on the matter of Earth's admission to the Galactic Council. When the final tally appeared, projected onto the domed ceiling in the universal numerical system, a collective murmur spread through the chamber. The vote was not merely favorable, it was unanimous. As the formal proceedings concluded, Ambassador Lirzal approached the human delegation. He performed the traditional Earth gesture of a handshake with Admiral Kincaid, then turned to Captain Iqbal. Captain Nalakesh would be proud, he said softly. Iqbal's expression remained composed, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. She wouldn't care about the politics. She'd only ask if we saved your people. And we did, Lirzal replied. But you humans saved something more. You gave the galaxy a new story to tell. As they exited the chamber, they passed a newly installed memorial, a simple holographic display showing 41 names, with Captain Vriya Nalakesh at the top. Beneath the names was inscribed a single line in multiple languages. Tell them we stood. Admiral Kincaid paused before the memorial, his weathered face solemn. You know, in the original Battle of Thermopylae, none of the 300 survived. I know, Iqbal replied. But their story did. As will ours, Lirzal added. For as long as there are stars in the sky and species to gaze upon them, the galaxy will remember Drekmar Valley. Above them, the artificial sky of the council chamber displayed the countless worlds of the